I need a husband in the next 10 minutes, or my life is over. That's exactly what Era told Lucian, the terrifying outcast of the powerful Beaumont family. She needed a way to walk out of her ruined engagement party with her pride intact. His price for marrying her on the spot? To destroy your brother, publicly, permanently. Watch how this fake arrangement turned into the deadliest corporate takedown in history.
Today, you and I are going to unpack a betrayal so profound it shatters the very concept of loyalty. Picture the scene. Ira is trembling, not from fear, but from a rage so pure it demands a sacrifice. She tears a massive diamond from her finger, hurling it across the freezing marble. The stone skids, coming to a halt at the feet of the one man the city fears. Lucian. In the background, her fiancé Adrian stands paralyzed, wearing the damning evidence of her sister's red lipstick on his collar. In a single minute, the illusion of Ira's perfect life vaporizes. 300 guests hold their breath as she meets Lucian's cold gaze and demands the unthinkable. She tells him to marry her, right there. The lesson here is undeniable. Sometimes the only way to survive a devastating fire is to walk straight into the absolute worst of the flames. Let us examine the architecture of this tragedy, beginning at the Beaumont estate. The ballroom itself was designed to diminish the human spirit. Imagine 40-foot ceilings and a chandelier suspended like frozen starlight over the room. 300 of the city's elite are packed into tailored suits, all raising a glass to toast the illusion of Ira and Adrian. For 2 years, they were the golden couple of high society. Yet, by the champagne fountain, Ira grips her glass, a hand pressed tight to her stomach to keep the panic at bay. She had spent a lifetime waiting for this exact night. Her mother glides past with a practiced, hollow smile, offering empty praise about her glow. It leaves us with a bitter reality check. The image of absolute perfection is usually just a very expensive, deeply exhausting illusion. Do not drink too much, her mother warns, the words slicing through the celebration like cold steel. I am fine, Era replies, the defense automatic. But her mother presses on, demanding to know the whereabouts of Cleo, the younger sister who vanished during the cocktail hour. Era gives a dismissive shake of her head, but she receives a strict command to hunt her down for a family photograph. As her mother dissolves into the sea of silk and wealth, Era is left alone with a gnawing ache in her chest. For months, Cleo had been slipping away, dodging calls, breaking plans, leaving behind a trail of quiet absences. Era blamed it on simple jealousy. But here is a heavy truth we must acknowledge. We almost always ignore the most massive, blazing red flags when they are held by the very people we love the most. Yet on the most significant night of her existence, her own flesh and blood had not even bothered to offer a greeting. Era stops a passing waiter, asking if he has seen a woman wearing an emerald green dress. He points toward the Shahjazovs of the East Wing, noting she drifted that way 10 minutes prior. Abandoning her glass, Era slips out of the suffocating heat of the ballroom. She steps into the role she has played her entire life. She is the ultimate fixer. She intends to locate her sister, smooth over the unspoken drama, and drag her back into the blinding flash of the cameras. But the role of the peacemaker always demands a brutal price. In your desperate, unyielding rush to fix the broken people around you, you almost inevitably end up completely shattering yourself in the process. The East Wing feels suffocatingly quiet. The orchestral swell of the party fades into nothingness as Era moves down a dim corridor, flanked by the stairs of long-dead ancestors. At the end of the hall, a heavy oak door stands slightly ajar, spilling a thin sliver of light onto the carpet, and then Era hears it. A soft, breathless laugh, It is undeniably her sister, but the true horror follows immediately after. A low, familiar whisper belonging to the man she is supposed to marry in 3 months. Adrian. Era does not scream. She whispers his name like a ghost, like a woman who feels her life ending, but still prays for a different reality. She pushes the door open and the world shatters. The hardest truth is that the quietest sounds often destroy our worlds the most. Adrian is anchored to the spot, his hands gripping Cleo tightly, his mouth pressed against her neck. The tailored jacket Era spent hours helping him select is carelessly draped over a chair. For 3 agonizing seconds, the universe simply stops spinning. Then, Cleo opens her eyes and meets the gaze of her sister. The sound that escapes her throat will echo in Era's nightmares for decades. It is no apology. It is a sharp intake of breath, followed immediately by a sick, nervous giggle of guilt. Adrian trips over his own feet, stumbling backward in a pathetic display of cowardice, begging to explain. His hair is ruined, a smear of bright red lipstick damning him on the jaw. Listen closely to this. Your worst enemies can never truly destroy you. Only the people you trust blindly have the power to rip out your heart. This is the precise second the foundation crumbles. The heavy door stands wide open, framing Adrian as panic completely floods his guilty eyes. He actually summons the nerve to stammer out that pathetic cliché, claiming it is not what it looks like. Era cuts him down with a razor-sharp whisper, warning him not to finish that deeply insulting sentence. Behind him, her sister frantically tugs at the emerald dress, smoothing her ruined hair as if a neat appearance might magically reverse time. Cleo begins to plead, weeping that the situation is complicated. Era snaps back with the deadly precision of a loaded gun, demanding a timeline of their betrayal. It is a brutal pill to swallow, but life has a harsh way of teaching us that the deepest, most fatal wounds are always inflicted by the ones we let past our defenses. Adrian drags a trembling hand down his pale face and delivers the final blow. 8 months. He confesses they have been sharing this dark secret for 8 long months. Era feels her knees threaten to give way, but sheer willpower keeps her standing. She echoes the time frame out loud, her mind performing the agonizing emotional calculus. He had proposed to her while her own sister's perfume was likely still lingering on his collar. She demands to know if the grand wedding plans, the diamond ring, and the visits to her ailing grandmother were all just a twisted theater production. Was she merely the respectable cover story? He desperately swears his love is real, but let me tell you a fundamental truth. Real love demands total respect, and any future built upon a foundation of hidden betrayal is guaranteed to collapse into dust. He actually possesses the audacity to continue pleading, swearing against all logic that his feelings for her are genuine. Era simply raises a trembling hand, radiating absolute disgust, and commands him to never speak that sacred word in her presence again. Then she slowly pivots her gaze toward Cleo. We must understand the gravity of this. This is not a stranger in a crowded room. This is her younger sister, the child whose hair she used to braid before school, the woman chosen to stand beside her as the maid of honor. Era looks at the girl she spent a lifetime protecting, letting the silence stretch until it becomes unbearable. The lesson we learn in these quiet, devastating moments is that the cruelest daggers are always forged in the fires of shared history, wielded by those who know exactly where to strike. Picture the psychology of this absolute wreckage. Cleo is weeping openly, hiding behind the pathetic excuse that they simply could not control their desires. Era lets out a hollow, metallic laugh that contains zero joy. She weaponizes her sarcasm, offering a mock apology that their deception was so terribly inconvenient. Then, the fire in her eyes turns to glacial ice. She reminds them of the reality below. 300 powerful guests, including senators and the press, are eagerly waiting downstairs. Adrian loses all color, his expensive facade crumbling into pure terror. Era points a single finger, commanding them to stay in that room and anticipate the absolute ruin coming for their reputations. The life lesson here is profound. True power is never found in screaming. It lives in that terrifying, freezing calm right before you unleash the storm. The betrayers are still begging for mercy, but Ira has already crossed the threshold. She drifts down the hallway in a state of shock, coming to a dead stop at the pinnacle of the grand staircase. Below her, 300 oblivious socialites are drinking and laughing, completely unaware they are about to witness her public humiliation. A very human instinct urges her to flee out the back door and vanish into the night. You and I have probably both felt that exact urge to hide when the pain becomes too intense to carry. That is a difficult lesson. Running often feels like the only logical escape, but a fierce, ancestral pride within her refuses to let her fade away. At that exact moment, her vision locks onto a solitary figure by the far wall. He holds a glass of amber liquor, observing the room with a dangerous, predatory stillness. We must now examine the true catalyst of this narrative, Lucien Beaumont. This is Adrian's older brother, the exiled heir to the family dynasty. He skipped the formal dinner entirely, arriving late in a dark suit, projecting the aura of a starving wolf analyzing a weak fence. He was pushed out of the family syndicate years ago, simply because he refused to bow to their control. Era had been instructed by her future mother-in-law to pretend this man did not even exist. But observe this vital life lesson. The very outcasts that society desperately tries to ignore are almost always the ones who perceive the truth with absolute clarity. Right now, Lucien stares directly up at the balcony. He holds Ira's gaze with the intensity of a man who has anticipated this exact fracture, recognizing from 40 feet away that her entire world has just burned to ash. Stick with me here, because the psychology of this next move is entirely fascinating. Era begins her descent, practically sleepwalking into the inferno. As she takes the marble stairs into the ballroom, the atmosphere drops 10 degrees. The string quartet falters into silence. The wealthy crowd intuitively splits down the middle, parting like the sea to avoid the blast radius of a walking tragedy. She marches directly toward Lucien Beaumont. Up close, a jagged scar cuts across his eyebrow, undeniable proof of a life built on harsh survival. He does not flinch as she approaches. His cold gray eyes anchor her, projecting an eerie knowingness of what she is about to ask. It teaches us something beautifully tragic about human nature. Sometimes the heaviest choices we will ever make are not calculated in our minds. Our desperate feet simply carry us straight past the point of no return. Picture the scene with me. Ira stands trembling under the weight of 300 elite guests, staring daggers into her back. Lucien observes her quietly until she demands a colossal favor. The opulent ballroom plunges into a suffocating silence. Taking a jagged breath, she unleashes absolute devastation, demanding that he marry her right now. Lucien remains motionless, yet a pitch-black shadow flickers across his gaze, the chilling hunger of a predator smelling blood in the water. She amplifies her voice, insisting he do it before the paralyzed crowd. A crystal glass shatters in the distance. He slowly questions if she comprehends who he really is. Meeting his stare, she confirms she knows exactly his true nature. We must understand that sometimes The most treacherous paths we walk are the very ones we choose with our eyes wide open. Lucian dismisses the murmuring crowd, his gaze drifting past Aira to the grand staircase. He fixes his attention on the walking disaster that is his brother, Adrian. The man stumbles into the light looking disgraced, his shirt untucked and a stranger's lipstick smeared across his collar. Observing this, a dark, calculating smirk stretches across Lucian's face. It is the look of a man handed the exact weapon he has spent his life hunting down. He quietly asks Aira if she has thought this through. She bluntly replies that she considered it for exactly 4 minutes. He notes the brevity, but she fiercely counters that they were the longest 4 minutes of her existence. It reveals a profound truth about human nature. Deep, agonizing heartbreak possesses a cruel ability to completely distort our perception of time. Aira shocks even herself by laying bare the absolute truth. She tells him he is her choice because he is the only man in this twisted family who cannot be bought or intimidated. She points out that he despises his brother, his mother hates him, and if she does not secure a husband in 10 minutes, her social standing is ruined. Lucian thoroughly enjoys this honesty, his dark smile widening. He whispers that she is ruthless, to which she fires back that she is simply doing what is necessary. When he asks about his prize, she steps close enough to catch the scent of rich whiskey on his breath. She promises him the chance to destroy his cheating brother, publicly and permanently. This exchange serves as a harsh reminder for us. Pure, unadulterated anger will always push you to build bridges with the very demons you were once warned to avoid. She meets his gaze with unwavering intensity and declares their arrangement begins tonight. Lucian studies her face for a heavy moment before extending his hand to seal the pact. "Done?" he says smoothly. Suddenly, an enraged scream tears through the quiet room. It is Adrian, violently shoving his way past the stunned socialites, his face pale and frantic. He screams at his brother to get his hands off her, which is ironic since Lucian has not even touched her yet. Lucian simply tilts his head, casually noting that Adrian seems a little upset. Panic consumes the cheating ex as he begs Aira, insisting she is just in shock. She shuts him down with freezing clarity, stating she means every single word. He foolishly claims they can still fix things. Betrayal is insidious that way, always trying to desperately convince you that your own 2 eyes are lying to you. Adrian pleads with her to talk privately, begging her not to do anything crazy. The word triggers a bitter laugh from Aira. She raises her voice, demanding to know where Cleo is. Yes, her own sister. She challenges Adrian to drag Cleo down so they can discuss his infidelity in front of 300 witnesses. The color drains from his lying face as he weakly whispers for her to stop. She coldly replies that he is far too late. Turning her back on him, Aira presents her bare left hand to Lucian, her old diamond already tossed aside like garbage. She boldly asks if he has a ring. Without hesitation, Lucian produces a heavy gold Beaumont family crest. You and I can learn a lot from this profound shift. We rarely realize how fast a supposedly great love can turn to pure ash until the cold wind finally starts blowing. Lucian delivers a devastating blow, his voice dropping to a low rumble. He confesses he has carried this ring for 9 long years, waiting for the perfect moment. He slides the heavy metal onto her finger. It is too large, prompting her to curl her hand into a tight fist to keep it anchored. Adrian loses his mind and lunges toward them, yet Lucian does not even flinch. From the shadows, a man in a sharp grey suit steps forward, blocking Adrian's path with absolute authority. Lucian smirks, reminding his brother that the state attorney general is standing right there. Adrian freezes, his eyes darting like a trapped rat as he notices dozens of cell phones recording his downfall. He then spots his mother, Margot, looking utterly ghostly. It is a universal truth. A cornered man will always search for his mother when the fragile architecture of his lies finally collapses. Margot Beaumont stands at the perimeter, her champagne glass for Ms. Wadvig to her lips. Her fierce glare is locked onto that gold ring, the very artifact she explicitly ordered destroyed 9 years prior. She hisses her son's name, venomously demanding a word. Lucian dismisses her with chilling indifference. He ignores her toxic presence, turning to Ira and gently taking her arm, treating her as though she were crafted from fragile glass. He softly asks if she is ready to depart. Ira is more than ready, as Margot loses her composure and shrieks his name. Lucian simply tosses a smooth, sarcastic farewell over his shoulder. The crowd of elite guests immediately splits down the center, parting for them like a dark, living sea. We must remember that true power never begs for attention, it simply commands the space it occupies. Let us pause and observe this spectacle together. The ballroom descends into unhinged, beautiful chaos. Someone is openly weeping, another guest cackles with manic delight, and phone cameras flash like gunfire in the dim light. Ira refuses to give the vultures the satisfaction of her attention, keeping her gaze locked on the exit doors. But at the threshold, she permits herself one final glance backward. It is a masterpiece of ruin. Her cheating ex is sobbing on his knees against the marble floor. His mother is hysterically screaming at the musicians to play something. And there stands Cleo, the treacherous sister, weeping at the top of the stairs as thick mascara ruins her face. Ira absorbs every drop of that bitter cocktail. Rock bottom is an agonizing place to visit, but it provides an incredibly solid foundation to build your ultimate resilience upon. Amidst that crushing atmosphere of sorrow, a profound realization washes over Ira. For the first time in her meticulously polite life, she feels completely untethered and dangerous. Stepping into the shadows, Lucian addresses her formally as Miss Callahan. She immediately stops him, her voice holding firm. She tells him her name is Ira, making it clear that if she is going to be his wife, he will address her directly. The calculated lines of his face visibly shift. It is not warmth as the man operates with icy detachment, but rather a distinct spark of mutual respect between two apex predators. He softly agrees, testing her name before leading her away. The massive estate doors slam shut behind them with the absolute finality of a heavy vault. It serves as a vital reminder that the most significant doors in our lives are always the ones we bravely choose to close for good. Ira has no comprehension of the catastrophic hurricane she just unleashed. Sliding into the plush leather of Lucian's black sedan, her only anchor is the cold bite of that oversized gold crest digging into her palm. The blurred neon lights of the passing cityscape wash over her exhausted features. She has chained herself to a dangerous enforcer, all to orchestrate the ruin of the man who broke her heart. Yet, remarkably, she refuses to harbor a single ounce of guilt. She is finished with making apologies for other people's sins. They are barely 5 minutes down the highway when her designer clutch begins to vibrate aggressively, buzzing with the desperate energy of a trapped hornet. She slowly retrieves the phone. We spend so much of our existence fleeing from conflict, completely forgetting how deeply empowering a spark of controlled chaos can truly be. The screen illuminates the dark car, revealing a digital wasteland of panic. 47 missed calls in minutes. Her parents, Cleo relentlessly spamming her, and Adrian pathetically pleading into the void. She studies the glowing screen, then calmly flips it face down onto her velvet dress, severing their access entirely. Across the seat, Lucian sits with terrifyingly perfect posture, idly swirling a glass of amber whiskey. He points out that she must confront them eventually. "Not tonight," she whispers. He accepts her boundary, then reveals they are heading directly to his apartment. Era releases a hollow sound, fractured between a bitter laugh and an exhausted sob, confessing she no longer even knows what day it is. You and I must recognize this psychological truth. Deep emotional trauma possesses a cruel ability to completely erase our basic sense of time. Fast forward a bit. Lucian checks his silver watch in the shadows, mentioning it is Saturday, and they are exactly 1 hour into their fake marriage. Then he drops a heavy detail. It is not legally binding yet. Era is thrown, demanding an explanation. He smoothly clarifies that the ballroom stunt was pure theater, beautiful, brutal theater, but the law does not recognize it. Era closes her eyes, a massive sigh escaping her lungs. She admits she was not thinking straight. You and I have probably both felt the blind, reckless rage before, where you act first and think later. It brings us to a harsh truth. Raw anger makes us do wild things, and pushing us to strike the match without checking the wind. Lucian finishes her thought, noting she just wanted to burn her cheating former fiancé to the ground and force him to watch her walk away in the ashes. Lucian lets a slow smirk form, asking if she secretly wanted his toxic mother to have a complete meltdown in front of the board too. Era, drained but honest, admits he is painfully right. Then he hands her the ultimate validation. She actually pulled off all three. The mother-in-law suffered her first public humiliation. In 30 years, the former fiancé entirely torched his own social standing, and Era walked out looking like an absolute legend. By Monday morning, she will be the main character of the city. Era worries that kind of spotlight is a bad thing, but Lucian calmly explains that it is a weapon if she knows how to swing it. That is a real-life lesson right there. We are usually terrified of our own power until surviving forces us to finally pick it up and use it. The dark sedan just keeps gliding down this lonely, pitch-black highway, carrying them deeper into a total unknown. Picture the kind of neighborhood where stealth wealth hides in plain sight. There are no flashy logos here, only massive glass towers guarding billionaire secrets. Lucian parks the car in an underground bunker and opens her door, but Era is totally frozen in her seat. His voice stays low and steady as he tells her she is in shock, offering his hand like a solid rock in a raging storm. She slowly takes it. They step into an elevator that demands a fingerprint, a code, and a key, eventually stepping out into a massive, silent penthouse in the clouds. A lonely piano sits near a towering wall of old books. Era bypasses it all, walking straight to the window and pressing her hands against the freezing glass. It brings up a tough life lesson. Sometimes the clearest, most beautiful glass only serves to show us how deeply trapped we really are in our own mess. Era starts to panic, whispering frantically that her mother is absolutely going to disown her. Lucian remains completely calm, explaining that her mom will be furious for about 6 weeks. But once she realizes Era secured a fortune way bigger than her dad ever could, her morals will magically adjust. It is classic opportunist behavior. Then he casually mentions her dad is probably pacing the floor right now, begging lawyers to save a massive merger from this fresh scandal. Era snaps her head around, totally shocked, asking how he could possibly know about a secret corporate merger. He looks at her with zero emotion and states he knows every single deal his family touches. You and I both know how it goes. in these circles. The quiet ones standing in the back of the room are always the ones holding all the devastating secrets. That is a life lesson you can take to the bank. Era shivers, her voice trembling as she asks if he's been watching her family this entire time. Lucian corrects her with a single heavy word, saying he has been waiting. His tone carries so much gravity, it literally gives her goosebumps. She asks what he meant back there about carrying that ring for 9 whole years. Taking a seat on the sofa, he lets the heavy, awkward silence stretch out before dropping the truth. When he was 24, fully ready to take over the syndicate, his dad died. Barely 2 weeks later, his own mother locked him out, stripped his board seat, and handed the empire to Adrian, a teenager with 0 experience. Honestly, here is a painful life lesson. Nothing destroys your soul quite like getting stabbed in the back by the exact same people who were supposed to protect and care for you. The betrayal always comes from the inside. Ira is struggling to understand, asking why his own mother would ever do something like that. Lucian goes completely cold, his eyes darkening as he explains it was because he refused to be her puppet. She wanted him to fabricate $400 million in phantom earnings. Era is stunned, whispering that what he is describing is literal fraud. Lucian confirms it without blinking, adding that Adrian just blindly signed whatever Mommy Dearest pushed across the desk. This toxic rot has been spreading since the very day his father was put in the ground. Ira feels her legs give out. She hits the floor as the horror sets in. If her father merges his company with this criminal empire and the feds find out, her entire family goes down in flames. It brings us to a harsh life lesson. The hidden sins of selfish people will always end up demanding a brutal payment from the innocent. Lucian drops a hard, unforgiving yes to her worst fears. Ira just buries her face in her hands, completely devastated, while the neon city hums quietly 30 floors below them. She desperately asks why he did not just go to the cops to stop the madness. He explains that his mother operates like a ruthless mob boss. Whenever he got close to exposing her, key witnesses magically disappeared, evidence vanished in sudden fires, and people labeled him crazy. Furthermore, until Era proposed, he had absolute 0 access to the inner circle. That was the real reason he said yes. Era immediately accuses him of using her, but he snaps right back, reminding her she used him first by proposing to a total stranger in front of 300 guests. Let this be a life lesson. Sometimes you find out your knight in shining armor is secretly fighting a ruthless, dark war of his own. He tells her to stop pretending either of them are innocent little victims in this twisted game. Era almost laughs, despite the panic, because, honestly, the guy makes a solid point. Pulling her knees to her chest, she finally asks the big question, is he going to hurt her? Lucian sets his glass down with this intense, terrifying precision. He looks at her and simply says no. Ira pushes back, asking if it is really just a simple no. His voice drops into a deep rumble as he promises to never lie to her or hide the ugly truths. He freely admits he is not a soft, warm guy, but he swears he will never hurt her, physically or emotionally, in secret or in public. Stick with me here, because you and I both need to hear this ultimate life lesson. A cold, hard vow of absolute loyalty from a dangerous man is worth 1,000,000 times more than the fake, hollow love of a cheating coward. Ira stands there, taking a shaky breath, and points out that there's a whole lot of promises from a guy she literally met 90 minutes ago. And Lucian? He has absolute ice in his veins. He just looks at her and points out that they got married 90 minutes ago, so promises are kind of the whole point. Meanwhile, her phone is absolutely blowing up on the table. It is Cleo, her backstabbing snake of a sister. Without even blinking, Era permanently blocks her number. Completely savage, Lucian tells her she needs to sleep, pointing her toward a guest room stocked with fresh clothes. When she asks why a single man has a wardrobe of women's clothing, he drops a massive law bomb. They belong to a sister he no longer speaks to. It is a harsh reality to swallow, but sometimes holding on to the memory of someone who is still alive hurts far more than mourning the dead. So Lucian unpacks a little more of his tragic backstory. The clothes actually belong to Ivy, his half-sister from his father's first marriage. She is currently living quietly in Boston as a doctor, completely separated from his chaotic, ruthless mobster war. But then he hits Era with a massive reality check. He tells her point blank that she is not his prisoner. She can literally walk out the door tomorrow, claim the sudden wedding was just a manic public relations stunt, and he will totally back her story. He even tells her to keep the massive diamond ring and the fat stack of cash he is wiring her. But here is the crazy part. Freedom feels absolutely terrifying when you finally realize the safe, cozy life you just escaped was actually a giant trap. Sometimes the absolute scariest thing a person can do in life is simply choose themselves and walk away from toxic people forever. Ira looks at this absolute unit of a man, taking in his faded physical scars and that terrifyingly calm energy he radiates. She asks what happens to his grand plan if she just bails. He deadpans that he will simply do what he has done for 9 long years. Wait, literal chills. But our girl Era finally locates her backbone in the wreckage. She flat out refuses to let her toxic former partner, her snake of a sister, or her awful mother win this game. She tells him she is staying, but they are playing by her rules now. Rule 1 is absolute honesty, with no sugarcoating, just to protect her feelings. Rule 2 means separate bedrooms, while she processes this absolute rollercoaster of a night. Let me tell you, true partnership does not start with some flawless fairy tale romance. It starts with mutual respect, forged right there in the ashes of betrayal, by setting firm boundaries early. Then, Ira drops her third rule, and it carries some serious weight. She demands that any dirt he digs up on her family has to go straight to her before the lawyers or the press get their hands on it. She wants the right to handle her own blood. For the very first time, the calculated Mafia boss actually hesitates. He flat out tells her that if her dad is about to be arrested, he is not going to politely pass the toast at breakfast and chat about it. He is going to launch his counterattack immediately and brief her while the world burns down around them. It is brutal, but the pragmatism is completely undeniable. Era swallows her pride and agrees, demanding he stop sheltering her from the ugly truth. The hardest boundaries to set in our lives are always the ones that force us to face our own painful reality head-on, without any comforting illusions to hide behind. Finally, Era lays down rule number 4. They need to make this marriage legally binding before the week is even over. Lucian is genuinely shaken for a second, but Era knows exactly how her manipulative mother operates in the shadows. If they give that woman even a single second to breathe, she will buy off a judge, find a legal loophole, and completely destroy them both. They have to lock the trap down fast. Lucian leans back in his chair, and you can see the respect practically leveling up in his eyes. He calls her genuinely dangerous, though she just brushes it off, claiming she is just utterly exhausted. But honestly, let's look at this piece by piece together. The absolute most dangerous thing a person can ever do is finally realize they have nothing left to lose. Because the moment someone's reaches that breaking point, they become completely, terrifyingly unstoppable. Era drags her exhausted feet toward the bedroom, but Lucien's heavy voice stops her completely cold. He speaks with deliberate caution, as if diffusing a live explosive. He tells her a truth she desperately needs to hear. The betrayal she endured tonight is not a reflection of her own worth. She did not miss a glaring red flag, nor did she fail as a loving partner. Sometimes, he explains, certain people are simply built broken from the inside out, and when gravity takes them down, they drag anyone standing close into the abyss. Era freezes in the dark doorway, entirely incapable of turning to face him. It teaches us a difficult reality. When your entire universe is burned to ash by the people you trusted most, sheer, stubborn pride is often the last shield you have left to hold. Today, you and I are going to unpack this psychological wreckage together. Era whispers a fragile thank you, carrying her shattered heart into the guest room before shutting the door. Pressing a heavy pillow over her face, she simply screams. She unleashes every ounce of that violent grief until she is completely hollowed out, crashing for 11 straight hours. When she finally wakes, heavy rain is washing over the city. Her phone sits like an unexploded grenade with 200 missed calls. Ignoring the chaos, she opens a single text sent at dawn. Do not read the news. It reveals a simple truth we all learn eventually. The exact moment someone warns you to look away is precisely when the real psychological warfare actually begins. There is a sickening sensation when the solid ground vanishes beneath your feet, and Era feels it instantly. A warning to avoid the news translates directly to the end of life as she knows it. Shivering with panic, she pulls on a heavy sweater and creeps barefoot down the quiet hallway. She finds Lucien leaning against the kitchen counter, gripping his phone tight enough to shatter the glass. His voice is a low rumble as he barks ruthless orders, threatening to drop a devastating ethics complaint on the bar association. The wildest detail is that his target is his own mother. It forces us to recognize a harsh lesson. Unconditional family loyalty is a myth when power enters the room, and a person must always prioritize their own peace above blood. For a fleeting second, the untouchable syndicate boss actually looks rattled. If Lucien were an ordinary man, we would easily call that expression pure regret. Era can hardly control her shaking voice as she begs to know what happened while she slept. Lucien sets his phone onto the cold marble counter with the finality of a judge dropping a gavel. He lays out the nightmare timeline. The night before, his mother called Era's mother, who then called her father, pulling in a former partner. It was a perfectly orchestrated alliance of betrayers. By 2 a.m, her sister Cleo was already delivering a tearful interview to the press. It is a brutal reality we must all accept. Sometimes the most fatal cuts come directly from the very hands we use to hold for comfort. Let's take a closer look at this digital nightmare, shall we? The tablet screen radiates pure toxicity. The vicious headline is spreading like wildfire across every platform. My sister stole my life. Cleo breaks her silence. Era physically stops breathing. The sheer scale of the betrayal wraps around her throat like an iron vice. She whispers a desperate denial. But Lucien gently nudges her to keep reading, insisting she must understand her enemy. Her terrified eyes scan the venomous paragraphs. Cleo has the audacity to claim Era's engagement to Adrian was a fake, sobbing that she had secretly loved him since college. It leaves us with a vital lesson. Envy within a family is a creeping poison, and it will always destroy a home from the inside out. The garbage article just keeps delivering blow after devastating blow. Cleo tells journalists that Adrian tried to walk away months ago, but Ira allegedly threatened to harm herself if he ever left. Horrified, Ira gasps that such a thing never happened. The article goes on to paint her as deeply unstable, framing her dramatic Mafia proposal as a total mental breakdown. Ira's hands go numb, and the tablet clatters onto the stone counter. She desperately asks why her own flesh and blood would orchestrate such a massacre. Lucian delivers the cold truth. Cleo is simply terrified, fully aware she now wears a massive target on her back. It is a heartbreaking reality we must all learn. Pure fear and unchecked guilt can quickly mutate the people we love into unrecognizable monsters. It is heavy to watch a person realize they are trapped. Leaning in with a cold gaze, Lucian explains the Beaumont family's survival strategy. They decided their only move is to paint Ira as an unhinged villain. By Monday, half the city will view her as a violently jealous sister. But here is the plot twist in this cycle of manipulation. The other half of the city will be harder to convince because they will be absolutely right. Ira demands to know what he means. Lucian drops the final bomb. 46 minutes after they fled the ballroom, someone wired $800,000 from his mother's secret account to the Caymans. It reveals a timeless life lesson we should all remember. Always follow the money, because that is exactly where the real truth hides. Stick with me. This is where the web of deception gets incredibly dark. Lucian's voice slices through the silence like a sharpened blade. He reveals their enemies are systematically framing her. They are fabricating a paper trail, making it look as though Ira accepted dirty Beaumont money for 2 years, turning her broken engagement into a calculated cover. Ira is speechless, choking on the sound of her own name. Lucian drops the final hammer. In less than a week, they will have fake documents, paid witnesses, and a corrupt federal agent ready to throw her in a cell. It brings us a chilling realization about human nature. Sometimes, the people who smile at you the brightest are the exact same ones quietly digging your grave behind your back. Lucian goes ice cold as he outlines the worst-case scenario. They fully intend to lock her in a prison cell. Ira grips the marble counter until her knuckles turn stark white. Instead of breaking down, a fierce fire ignites inside her. She looks him in the eye and declares they are going to stop them. When Lucian attempts to warn her, she shuts him down instantly. She reminds him that he waited 9 years for his own revenge, and now she is matching that exact same ruthless energy. If they want a brutal mafia war, she is ready. If they want her to play the villain, she will play it flawlessly. It teaches us something profound about human resilience. Total betrayal does not have to break your spirit. If channeled correctly, it can forge you into the exact weapon you need to survive. Hearing her resolve, the boss breaks into a genuine, dangerous smile. He calls her Mrs. Beaumont, a title dripping with respect, and assures her they will do fine. Ira does not waste a second. Ignoring the flood of toxic texts from her manipulative family, she dials one specific contact. When her loyal friend Nadia picks up, Ira drops the master plan. She tells Nadia to grab her camera equipment because they are shooting a live expose right now. Talk about an absolute power move. Nadia pulls up to the penthouse in 42 minutes flat, looking like a soldier stepping onto a battlefield. It reveals a beautiful truth about loyalty we should all remember. When your world collapses, your true friends will show up fully armed and ready to fight your wars without ever asking why. Ira instantly shuts down any emotional vulnerability. She forbids Nadia from offering a hug, knowing a moment of softness will cause her to break down. Nobody has the luxury of tears when orchestrating revenge. Nadia respects the boundary, demanding a hug only after the dust settles. Then, Nadia spots Lucian leaning against the counter, sleeves rolled up while ruthlessly dominating a phone call. He offers a smooth wave without pausing his intimidation tactics. Nadia's jaw drops, playfully whispering for Ira to go claim her man. Ira swiftly threatens to kick her out if she does not set up the lights. It highlights a practical life lesson we all need. Sometimes you have to block out every single distraction, even the beautiful ones, to stay fiercely focused on your ultimate goal. You and I are going to look at this together and decide if this is true justice. We frame the scene in a dark, moody library. Nadia throws her hands up in surrender. But this woman is incredibly serious. Having survived military tours before shooting documentaries, her vibe is pure precision. For the first time in 12 hours, Era feels her anxiety settle just by watching her friend work the camera gear. Nadia dials the lens into focus and asks for the game plan. Era coldly states she wants to expose every single lie. Nadia pauses, warning her that a video like this is a confession and the internet is permanent. It brings us to a sobering truth about conflict. Words are exactly like loaded bullets. Once you pull that trigger, you can never force them back into the chamber. Let us look at this together. Era goes completely silent, her mind sharpening to a cold edge. She wants to burn everything down to expose her sister as a liar and Adrian for his 8 months of deceit. She refuses to be framed by his toxic family or to just quietly fade away. But Lucian stops her. He pulls her into the dim hallway, shutting the door to lay out the brutal reality. If she names her sister, she faces a massive defamation lawsuit. Expose Adrian, and his lawyers will bury her in restraining orders before dawn. Leak the money transfer, and they destroy the evidence. Acting on raw anger alone is a dangerous trap. In life, moving entirely on sudden emotion usually gives your enemies exactly what they need to destroy you. True survival requires cold patience. Era is desperate, begging Lucian to tell her what to say. His response is unnervingly calm. He tells her to drop the hard facts and focus strictly on her emotions. He wants her to cry on the recording, to let her hands visibly shake. If the public sees a shattered woman betrayed by her sister and fiancé, they will naturally defend her. When people connect with your genuine heartbreak, enemies lose the power to label you unstable. He tells her not to fake anything, but simply to stop forcing herself to be strong. Era whispers that his mind for this is terrifying. His cold eyes shift away, noting he learned it by watching his mother survive for 30 years. It is a stark reality that our most potent survival skills often grow directly from our earliest family trauma. They step into the quiet library, and the recording light clicks on. For 12 long hours, Era built a fortress of ice around her heart just to survive, but now she finally lets it shatter. There is no script here, just raw truth spilling out. She describes the heavy mahogany desk and the smeared lipstick on Adrian's collar. A genuine sob escapes when she remembers her sister actually giggling after being caught. Then she brings up their grandmother's funeral, which Adrian skipped for a fake emergency. The dark realization hits her visibly on camera. That was exactly 8 months ago. She breaks down, recalling the silver earring hidden in his car. Lowering your defenses to the world is deeply frightening, but honest vulnerability remains the most effective weapon a person can ever choose to wield. Era speaks until her voice cracks, then pushes further. Looking dead into the lens, she states she is not unstable or controlling. Adrian stayed simply because he enjoyed the thrill of a double life. You and I have probably felt that rush of breaking free, when telling the truth finally outweighs your fear. She exposes her sister for selling lies to the press out of sheer panic. Eira's finished playing the polite victim. She left that ballroom, and they can no longer force her into submission. When Nadia asks why she trusted Lucien, Eira takes a deep breath. Because he was the only man in that room who never lied to her, she replies, real trust is never freely given. It is strictly earned in those lonely hours when everyone else is actively spinning lies to save themselves. Picture Eira finally stepping into her true power. She tells the camera that the Beaumont family spent 10 years painting Lucien as a ruthless monster. Yet, when her life exploded inside that ballroom, the real monsters were the ones holding the paintbrushes. Nadia cuts recording, visibly shaken. She whispers that this will be the biggest interview of the decade. The moment the light dies, Eira collapses inward. The adrenaline crash hits her so hard she has to trap her shaking hands beneath her legs to hide the physical toll. From the shadows, Lucien calmly asks when the footage will air. 5 o'clock tonight, Nadia confirms. It is a brutal lesson, but hitting absolute rock bottom is often the only way you can clearly see the faces of the people who smiled as they pushed you. Nadia means business. She will release the interview right before the evening news, pulling every favor to guarantee it dominates the press cycle. Lucien gives a quiet, approving nod. But then the atmosphere shifts. Nadia's voice drops, revealing a fresh nightmare. That brutal article was not just fed by her sister. Hidden in paragraph 11, an anonymous source claimed Eira had a history of mental instability. Eira feels the floor vanish. She gasps, demanding a name. The details were too specific, referencing private high school moments and hidden childhood secrets. It was an inside job. It reminds us of a dark psychological truth. The most devastating betrayals always come from those who watched you grow up, because they alone know exactly where to strike your weakest points. Eira suffocates on the revelation. Someone sharing her bloodline sold her out. Lucien steps forward, acting as a calm anchor in her emotional storm. He asks the vital question, who knew she was arriving last night? Eira's mind spins. Everyone knew. Lucien pushes her to focus, asking who was in the hallway when she ran. She squeezes her eyes shut, replaying the chaotic escape. The grand staircase, the shocked faces, and then a memory clicks. A flash of pale green silk near the servant doors. Aunt Delia. Her own mother's sister was hiding in the dark. It is a moment that forces us to confront a painful reality. We often forget that family is merely a biological coincidence. Genuine loyalty must be earned through trust, never blindly assumed. Just because you share a family tree, the horror settles into Eira's bones. She realizes her aunt watched her flee that ballroom with a shattered heart and did nothing. Lucien asks why her own blood would feed her to the wolves. The answer is toxic history, a 20-year grudge over an old inheritance. Her aunt was waiting for the exact moment to humiliate Eira's mother. Eira spirals, seeing her relatives lining up to take shots while she bleeds. Lucien remains completely unfazed, vowing to protect her. Nadia packs her gear, pausing at the door to give Eira a warm embrace. Eira just feels hollow. Stick with me here, because this is a dark psychological truth. When a betrayal cuts profoundly into your spirit, the tears actually stop flowing. You simply freeze over, lock your focus, and prepare yourself for an absolute war. Eira holds on to Nadia a fraction too long, clinging to the last shred of warmth in her collapsing world. Nadia whispers a promise that she has her back. Once the door clicks shut, Eira stands frozen. Lucien watches her from the corner, his gaze sharp and protective. She mutters that she needs a long shower. He tells her to take two, his tone acknowledging the heavy weight of the incoming war. By noon, the villainous Margot Beaumont has deployed a circus to the lobby. She sends 3 aggressive lawyers, a priest, and a corrupt senator, all demanding a private meeting. This highlights a very critical lesson about survival. Setting personal boundaries is completely useless unless you have the iron spine to enforce them when the most powerful bullies finally show up at your front door. The priest was a walking guilt trip, and the lawyers brought a shiny cease and desist, but Lucian's manager confidently turned the circuits away. By 1 o'clock, Margot's legal dogs shifted tactics, claiming Lucian was unstable to freeze his accounts. Here is the twist. 15 minutes later, Lucian's team fires back. They demand buried records from a highly specific 2017 board meeting. The impact is instant. By 1:30, Margot panics and withdraws her motion. It is a flawless checkmate. Lucian smirks at his monitor, aware this was merely a probe to test his walls. A wise person understands that the opening strike in a conflict is never the killing blow. It is simply your enemy quietly measuring exactly how hard you are willing to punch back. Now, she knows exactly what I am capable of, Lucian states with calm authority. But Era's mind is locked on a larger prize. The wedding, she says, her voice completely steady. She wants to do it tonight, before the explosive broadcast airs, before the inevitable fallout begins. She wants to be his legal wife by 5 o'clock. Lucian tries to warn her, pointing out they just met yesterday. He reminds her that a signature chains her to his dangerous world. Era fires back that this is the entire point. If she remains unprotected, Margot will destroy her credibility in days. It is a powerful realization. Sometimes, finding real safety demands that we intentionally burn our own boats, leaving absolutely zero room for retreat when the heavy chaos finally crashes onto the shore. Era lays out her plan with chilling precision. Margot will dismiss the engagement as a stunt, but a courthouse signature is ironclad. Era is playing high-level chess, locking down spousal privilege, financial access, and absolute courtroom rights. Lucian stares at her, stunned by her ruthless logic. He asks who taught her to think like a mastermind. Era does not miss a beat. Your mother? She replies, recalling 2 grueling years of psychological torture at Sunday dinners. Lucian lets out a startled laugh, a rare sound in this heavy air. He locks eyes with her and promises to meet at City Hall at 4 o'clock. You and I can take a profound lesson from this moment. The absolute most powerful weapons we will ever carry into our future are the brutal skills forced upon us by our worst enemies. Let's look at this piece by piece, shall we? Lucian issued a single instruction before they arrived at the dim City Hall office, where read, "The judge, compromised by Mafia debts, rushes the ceremony." Era stands there in a breathtaking crimson dress, the exact color her manipulative ex despised. Beside her, Lucian is clad in the same dark suit from their shattered engagement. Nadia watches quietly alongside Tomas, whose kind eyes contrast sharply with knuckles ruined by street violence. There is no kiss, only a cold distance. As the ink dries, Era becomes a Beaumont. She turns to the man she basically married twice in 24 hours, whispering that it is finished. Sometimes, reclaiming your true power means proudly wearing the exact things they told you to hide. The aftermath of trauma rarely starts with tears. Era stares at her new reality, confessing she feels absolutely nothing. Lucian recognizes this immediately. Speaking like a man deeply familiar with underworld violence, he quietly explains that shock is the only thing keeping her standing. The ugly emotions always arrive later. Then, at 5 o'clock, the interview goes public. It drops with devastating force. Within minutes, 500,000 people share the footage. A tidal wave of support takes over the internet, forcing major news networks to cut their broadcasts just to play her video. It is a brilliant display of consequence. The truth has a funny way of breaking through the strongest walls, washing away the arrogant people who actually believed they were untouchable. Notice how fragile toxic masculinity becomes when the spotlight turns harsh. Adrian completely loses his grip on reality. Confronted by a reporter outside his corporate tower, he throws a wild, desperate punch on live television. By 7 o'clock, his public meltdown is the most watched video on Earth. Back at the penthouse, the atmosphere is heavy. Era is curled on the sofa, clutching a bowl of cold noodles. She has not eaten in days, but Lucian used his quiet authority to make her hold the food. She sits there, stunned, repeating that her ex actually assaulted someone on camera. Lucian simply nods, letting her process the sheer panic of her former fiancé. People will always expose their true colors eventually. When the heat turns up, it easily melts away their carefully crafted masks. Era pushes the cold food away, the stress fully taking over her features. She mutters that this scandal will utterly destroy Adrian, and his ruthless mother will place the blame entirely on her. Lucian offers a grim, silent nod. Then Era finally asks the heavy question she has been choking on. Will this syndicate resort to violence over hidden offshore money? Lucian holds her gaze and bluntly says yes. When she asks how dark things could get, he slowly lowers his bowl. He reveals that his own mother is tied to two highly suspicious, fatal accidents involving a clerk and an accountant who simply knew too much. It is a chilling shift in tone. In the desperate chase for absolute power and wealth, certain people will gladly trade their humanity to leave a silent trail of bodies in their wake. Let us unpack this sharp shift in reality. Lucian's deep voice drops, calling those old fatal accidents entirely too convenient. Era freezes as the harsh truth of her new world finally sinks in. The boss steps forward and establishes strict survival rules. From this exact second, she ignores her phone unless it is him or Nadia. She does not walk outside alone. She does not touch unverified packages. If a stranger approaches, she runs. He holds her gaze, demanding to know if she grasps the massive danger hanging over them. She offers a shaky whisper of agreement. He reveals that Thomas is already securing the lobby, with heavy backup arriving by dawn. True security is never just about locking your doors. It is about deeply respecting how far ruthless people will go to crush you. Lucian promises she will not even notice the heavily armed security team. Era realizes he has mobilized a private army specifically for her protection. But Lucian corrects the thought. It is for them. Before today, he only had to worry about his own skin. Now she is his wife, and his ruthless mother knows exactly where his new weakness lies. Era looks down at her loose platinum wedding ring, the heavy symbol of this dark bargain. Letting her defensive armor fall, she asks if being totally terrified makes her a coward. For the first time, Lucian's hard expression softens. He tells her no, it just makes her human. The truly dangerous are the men who feel zero fear at all. Admitting you are terrified is never a weakness. It is simply the first necessary step to finding your courage. The past has a distinct way of haunting us. Era has been ignoring her phone, but a sharp vibration cuts through the quiet room. An unknown number delivers a chilling command: check your old inbox. Lucian clocks the panic washing over her face. His jaw tightens like a soldier anticipating an ambush. demanding to know what happened. Ada shakily presents the screen. The message points to an abandoned email address from 3 years ago, long before she was trapped in Adrian's toxic golden cage. Her hands tremble as she grabs her laptop, failing her password twice before breaking through. Among thousands of unread messages, one stands out as a massive shift in their war. Your past never truly stays buried. It simply waits in the dark for the absolute perfect moment to resurface. At the top of the inbox is a message sent 19 minutes ago from a hidden address. There is no subject line, only a single file attachment resting there like an unpinned grenade. Ibra clicks it open. The moment she processes the first sentence, a broken gasp escapes her lips. Lucian is on his feet in a fraction of a second. She whispers that he needs to read the screen. As he looks over her shoulder, the untouchable crime boss completely freezes. Era trembles, asking if this is the ultimate proof they have been searching for. Lucian breathes heavy. Yes, it is a gold mine of systemic fraud, offshore accounts, forged invoices, and condemning signatures from his own corrupt family. Never leave a careless paper trail behind your darkest deeds, because the truth is always relentless. Let us examine this evidence together. The documents reveal a staggering level of arrogance, showing Adrian and Margot discussing financial crimes as casually as predicting the weather. But Lucian bypasses the obvious guilt and zeroes in on the true danger, instructing Era to check the sender. She scrolls up, tracing the obscure digital footprint he points out. Her voice drops to a hollow whisper as she asks who leaked the files. The silence that follows is suffocating, heavy with the weight of impending war. The truth is always the heaviest burden a person can carry. Lucian finally breaks the quiet, admitting this was an inside job. Someone within their own ranks has chosen to burn the entire empire to ash. Era pleads for a name, but Lucian absolutely refuses to guess blindly. Lucian stares across the room, his eyes reflecting the grim realization that his family legacy is quietly imploding. He fixes his gaze on the table, lost in a dangerous calculation. When he finally speaks, his cold tone cuts straight through the tension. He explains that a leak this massive points to someone his mother trusts with her very life. It must be someone with total access to her secure accounts, private ledgers, and buried secrets. An ultimate sleeper agent waiting patiently to strike. We all have that one person we trust implicitly, and sometimes they are the ones holding the knife. Era demands to know who fits that impossible profile. Lucian sighs deeply. There are only 3 names on that list: her personal lawyer, her veteran assistant, and his own half-sister, Ivy. Era refuses to accept that theory. She sharply reminds him that Ivy swore she wanted no part in this toxic family war. Lucian defensively insists his sister is innocent. Frustrated, Era spins the laptop around, the harsh blue glow illuminating his face. She demands to know who else could leak enough proof to send his mother and half the board to federal prison for decades. But Lucian is no longer listening. He sits completely frozen, his eyes locked on a digital signature at the bottom of a file from 2018. The ink does not belong to his mother or his brother. It is the exact handwriting of a dead man. Clearing his dry throat, Lucian mutters that the ghosts of the past rarely stay buried. Our darkest secrets never truly die. They simply wait in the shadows for their time. His voice hollows out entirely. It is the kind of terrifying quiet that makes the air feel thin. He whispers that it is his father's signature. Era is visibly lost, reminding him that his father passed away in 2017. Lucian looks at her, wearing the expression of a man who just realized his entire existence is is built on a massive lie. He explains that his father had been buried for over a year when this document was authorized. His own family has been forging a dead man's name for 9 years just to maintain their empire. Imagine trusting your own blood only to discover they are wearing masks of deception. Meanwhile, miles away across the dark city, a mysterious woman in a silent office snaps her laptop shut. She flips off the lights and stares quietly out the high-rise window into the night. Let us look at this madness together. Picture Margot Beaumont, the cold architect of a crime family, watching her youngest son, Adrian, get shoved into a police cruiser on live television. His mouth is bleeding, yet she just sits there with a satisfied smirk. Eek. He is just a pawn she will gladly sacrifice to keep her throne. The real storm is brewing back at the apartment. Lucian is running entirely on vengeance. Ira wakes up terrified to see his office light still glaring. By Monday morning, he has printed 341 pages of lethal evidence, blasting copies to 4 secure servers across 3 continents. Here is a simple truth. Never put your trust in a toxic empire, because when survival is on the line, loyalty is nothing but a fragile illusion. At 5:47 in the morning, Lucian outlines a massive safety net over black coffee. He tells Era that if anyone tries to clip them, Hitman must wipe out 4 different lawyers in 4 different time zones first. Ira is shaking so badly she cannot even drink. She just grips the mug, trying to process the sheer scale of this vendetta. Finally, she asks the heaviest question of all. Did his father really die of a heart attack? The silence that fills the room is heavy enough to crush bone. Lucian admits he bought that fake story for 9 whole years. But if someone forged the family seal, the killer was inside the house. The hardest life lesson to swallow is exactly this. The monsters we check under the bed for are usually the very people sitting at our own dinner table. Lucian flat out admits he is done drinking his mother's poisonous lies. He is ready to burn her syndicate to the ground. Issa stops breathing for a second. The stakes just skyrocketed from corporate drama to absolute war. She paces the floor like a caged tiger. She demands to know their next move, terrified they are just sitting around waiting for a hit squad. Lucian looks at her with zero panic and drops the hammer. They are meeting the Federal Bureau of Investigation at 11 o'clock sharp. He made the play at 3 in the morning while the world slept. The lesson here is loud and clear. When your reality crumbles into dust, never let panic take the wheel. Take a breath, formulate an ironclad plan, and always strike first before your enemy even knows you are awake. Look at this strategy. Lucian reached into his old contacts and pulled out a wild card. A supervising special agent who has been starving to take down Margot for 6 solid years. They are handing over the vault today. No cameras, no traces until they are out the door. Era grips the counter, shaking, asking if they are actually pulling the trigger. Lucian softly tells her she does not have to walk into this fire with him. But Era refuses to play the weak sidekick. She tells him not to insult her intelligence, permanently locking in her loyalty. Lucian actually smirks. Right before they roll out at 9:47, Ira gets a ringing call from her mother. The life lesson here: real power is never about muscle or dirty money. It is about choosing to walk into the storm side by side. Ira picks up the phone, and her mother immediately starts losing her mind over the sudden marriage. Ira is entirely unfazed. She tells her mom she knows the truth. Her parents do not care about her safety. They only care about their shiny public image. Her father is currently scrambling, begging rich investors who are bailing on their corporate merger Her mother is crying about the stock market while her daughter's life is in grave danger. Then Era drops a bomb. She asks if her mom knew that Aunt Delia sold her deepest secrets to the tabloid press. The line goes completely dead. The sudden silence is absolute. Here is a brutal truth you and I need to remember. A person's sheer silence in the face of a heavy accusation is often the loudest, most damning confession they will ever give. That suffocating silence from the other end of the line confirms the ultimate betrayal. Her own mother knew about the tabloid leak and let it happen to protect the cash flow. Mom starts stammering and feeding her some garbage excuse about securing the family wealth. Imagine letting your sister call your daughter crazy on national television. On the very same day, her fiancé is caught sleeping with her sibling. The disrespect is entirely unreal. Era turns her voice into pure ice. She orders her mother to shut her mouth, declares she is hanging up, and promises to go completely ghost. Here is a life lesson you can take to the bank. When toxic people try to justify destroying your peace of mind for their personal gain, you never argue with them. You simply cut the cord and never look back. Her mother tries to whine her way out of it, but Era is completely savage now. She lays out the cold facts. She tells her mom that she chose a corporate merger and dirty wealth over her own bleeding daughter. She knew Adrian was trash, yet she looked Era in the eyes, feigned pity, and immediately dialed brokers to save their stock price. Era drops a cold goodbye and blocks her mother's number forever. Zero hesitation. She sits on the edge of the bed with the phone in her hands, and she does not shed a single tear. Her family is not getting one more ounce of her grief. We all need to learn from this exact moment. There comes a time when you stop crying over the people who repeatedly stab you in the back, and you start focusing entirely on surviving the bitter war they started. Lucian gives a soft knock and asks if she is ready for war. Era is locked in. They roll up to an undercover federal office on the 42nd floor. Enter Special Agent Marisol Vega, a veteran prosecutor who takes 0 prisoners. For an hour, she does not crack a single smile. But when she hits page 87 of Lucian's master file, she lets out a low whistle. Vega looks Lucian dead in the eye. She asks if he comprehends the sheer magnitude of this nuke he just dropped. She tells him point blank she will arrest his own mother on federal fraud charges before the week ends. Here is the vital life lesson. If you are ever going to burn a deeply toxic bridge, do not just strike a tiny match. Bring the absolute heaviest artillery you can find and wipe it completely off the map. Picture this tense, sterile room. Lucian is radiating a dead calm that would terrify a seasoned hitman. When Vega asks if he understands the fallout, he flatly asks why else he would bring her the file. Vega tries to rattle him, bringing up the crooked executives and the ghost of his murdered father. A single, forged signature is about to rip this entire criminal empire apart. Lucian hits her with a chilling warning. He says his mother does not know how to lose. If she catches wind of this meeting, she will unleash a wave of untraceable violence. The lesson here is out in the open. We are taught that family is supposed to be our ultimate safe harbor, but sometimes the very people sharing your bloodline are actually the deadliest, most destructive storm you will ever have to face. Vega is not backing down, zeroing in on Era. She demands to know if the wife is safe. Lucian says he is doing everything possible, but you can hear the tragic weight in his voice. He knows he just dragged an innocent woman into a mafia war. Vega looks at Era and delivers a brutal reality check. By testifying, Era is painting a massive bullseye on her back for the next 18 months. Era tries to act tough, claiming she will never fold under pressure. Vega shoots down that rookie confidence in a heartbeat. She warns that the real panic sets in 6 months down the line when the walls finally close in. The lesson here is painfully clear. It is incredibly easy to act tough on day one, but true courage is only measured when the bitter winds of consequence actually start tearing apart your front door. Ira locks eyes with the veteran agent, unleashing her origin story. Her ex-fiance cheated with her sister. Her mother chose a business deal over her sanity. Her aunt sold her trauma to the tabloids. She literally married a stranger just to keep her dignity alive. Pointing straight at Lucian, she declares, "This man is the only person who has not lied to her face all week." Vega studies the pure, unhinged fire burning in Era's eyes as she swears to lock her toxic bloodline in a cage and sleep perfectly while doing it. For the absolute first time, Vega actually smiles. Let us unpack this final lesson together. When the people closest to you deliberately burn your world straight to the ground, the bitter ashes they leave behind will eventually forge you an absolutely unbreakable spine. Let's unpack this moment together. This is where the classic mob paranoia takes over. Vega remarks that Lucian chose the perfect bride, and Lucian quietly agrees as they slip through a rusted door into an untraceable sedan. Lucian lays out the brutal rules of syndicate survival. Never use the same car, driver, or street twice. In the dark back seat, Era whispers that just 26 hours ago, she was shopping for shoes. Lucian offers a heavy laugh, replying that feeling completely insane is the only proper response to absolute chaos. She smiles, calling it deeply romantic. Here is a quiet life lesson. True romance is rarely found in grand, flashy gestures. It is finding that rare person who will sit beside you in the pitch black, validating your madness, while the rest of the world completely falls apart. Lucian tells her to keep the dark jokes coming. To him, that twisted humor is the only proof she has not cracked under the pressure. He keeps his eyes glued to his screen, but for a fraction of a second, the iron tension in his jaw softens. For a ruthless crime boss, that tiny physical shift is a massive display of tenderness. Ira immediately presses him about the leaked email. He admits his 4 best lawyers are working endlessly across 3 continents, coming up completely empty. The sender bounced the digital trail across 7 countries, erasing everything except for one highly calculated signature from 2018. This brings us to a harsh life lesson. The absolute most dangerous traps are never fully hidden in the dark. They are the ones that leave a perfectly lit path, quietly begging you to walk straight into the ambush. Lucian knows this leaked file is no accident. This shadow enemy sat on that explosive secret for years, waiting for the exact moment Lucian gained real power by marrying Era. He admits that before Saturday, he was practically a ghost. Era handed him a spotlight and a flawless narrative. The second they walked out of that ballroom, the rival syndicate knew the war had started. A freezing realization washes over Era. That means the traitor was breathing the exact same air as them at the party. Lucian slowly nods, confessing he only trusts 4 people on the entire planet. Here is brutal truth we all must remember. Building a massive circle of friends is often just a dangerous illusion. Real trust is an incredibly narrow, heavily guarded room, and you simply cannot afford to let just anyone step inside the door. Lucian lists the 4 pillars of his inner circle. Tomas was at the party and remains perfectly loyal, while his other 3 confidants were not even in the building. Era instantly connects the horrifying dots. The sender possesses a decade of secret Mafia board minutes and enough venom to ruin his mother. The traitor was hiding right there in plain sight. Era barely breathes her sister Cleo's name, letting it drop into the air like a curse. Lucian lets the silence linger, finally admitting he has agonized over that exact theory for 6 straight hours. His brother was a fool who leaked family secrets, giving Cleo 8 months to hoard ammunition. We constantly search for scary monsters in the dark, completely forgetting a vital life lesson. Total ruin usually wears a very familiar face, sleeping right down the hall from you. Lucian paints a savage, psychological picture. Cleo spent 8 solid months dropping perfectly timed questions, treating his brother like an endless fountain of crime family secrets. Era desperately tries to defend her sibling, clinging to the fading illusion that Cleo is just an innocent student. Lucian shatters that excuse instantly. He reminds her that Cleo orchestrated a media ambush at 2 in the morning, weaponizing their own aunt. That is not a panicked girl. That is a cold predator moving chess pieces. Ira stares out the window, completely broken, whispering that she was played all along. Lucian's voice drops to a low rumble. This reveals the absolute harshest reality in life. The most devastating wounds never come from a stranger. They come from the patient, quiet calculation of the exact people who claim to love us most. You and I have to appreciate how Lucian refuses to soften the blow. He breaks down Cleo's vicious psychological campaign to dismantle Era's life. That cheating fiancé? Just phase 1 of a deeply toxic cycle. If Ira had walked down the aisle, Cleo would have been smiling in her dress, waiting for the inevitable divorce to steal the crown. Ira trembles, asking why her sister leaked the file right now. Lucian offers a dark smirk. It is because Era ruined the script. She did the one thing Cleo never anticipated. She fought back instead of fading away quietly. In 90 seconds, Era flipped the entire board. Take a massive life lesson from this. When you refuse to play the broken victim in someone else's toxic narrative, you strip away their power and drag the true villain directly into the daylight. Lucian takes a slow breath, analyzing the frantic psychology of a cornered animal. Cleo is flying completely blind right now, improvising out of sheer panic. Leaking that email was her chaotic attempt to save her own skin. She is burning the entire syndicate to the ground, just so she will not be caught holding the match. Ira is struck by a chilling realization. If her sister is willing to destroy a 90-year-old Mafia empire, there is absolutely no ceiling to her madness. When Ira asks for the next move, Lucian presents a brutal choice. They have a tiny window to frame Cleo as a helpless witness to the feds, securing her probation. Listen closely to this life lesson. The heaviest burden we carry is having the power to destroy those who broke us, while knowing that showing them mercy might be the very thing that guarantees our own ruin. Lucian places a ruthless 48-hour timer on the decision. He can make a single phone call to let Cleo keep her spoiled life. But the second that window closes, her sister will sink with the rest of their enemies. Era is suddenly crushed by the psychological weight of old memories. She pictures a 7-year-old Cleo crying on a bus, and a teenage Cleo sobbing over a broken heart. But those soft fragments violently collide with the toxic reality of the present. The flash of that emerald dress, the calculated giggle, the ruthless media interview. For 24 years, Era acted as the ultimate human shield for her sister. But here is a rock-solid life lesson everyone must face. You simply cannot keep setting your own soul on fire just to provide warmth for the deeply toxic people who continuously plot your downfall in the shadows. Ira's mind flashes back to the silent vow she made at the top of that staircase. She is done playing the passive victim in her own life story. A single word drops from her lips with the heavy finality of a judge's gavel. No. Lucian watches her closely, asking if she is certain. Her energy is pure, unfiltered ice. Cleo made a deliberate choice to assassinate her sister's trust over 8 grueling months. Era looks the crime boss dead in the eyes and commands him to let the window of mercy close forever. She delivers a chilling warning. If he ever goes behind her back to save Cleo, their alliance is finished. This brings up a harsh but necessary life lesson. Forgiveness is a beautiful concept on paper, but real survival often requires you to let the heavy blade fall on those who spent months sharpening it against your own neck. Era commands the space like a true equal now, demanding to know if Lucian understands her boundaries. The crime boss studies her transformation before offering a solemn nod. The rest of the drive is followed by a thick, anxious silence. When the sedan finally stops, Tomas pulls the door open, and Era steps out into the cool air. But right before Lucian can follow, a primal survival instinct kicks into high gear. We all know that horrible prickle on the back of the neck, warning you that a predator is near. Across the street, a man in a grey coat pretends to look at his phone, but his dead eyes are locked on Era. He smirks, presses a gloved finger to his lips, and fades into the dark. Here is a terrifying life lesson. When the absolute worst monsters stepped directly into the streetlights to say hello, you realize the true war has only just begun. Let's look closely at this scene, because pure psychological terror has a specific frequency. Sometimes the most dangerous moments crash into you without making a single sound. For Era, it is the suffocating silence of the marble lobby as she frantically whispers, begging Lucian not to look behind them. The boss does not even flinch. He grips her arm and shoves her into the elevator. The exact second those steel doors seal shut, he demands the intel. She describes Phantom, a grey coat, around 50 years old, short hair. But the detail that changes the game, a pale chin scar shaped exactly like a fishhook. Lucian's face instantly drains of all color. This proves a vital life lesson. You can build the thickest armor imaginable, but the universe will always find the one highly specific detail required to bypass your walls and shatter your peace of mind. You have to grasp the absolute psychological nightmare of what Lucian reveals next. His voice sounds like grinding glass as he confesses that the stalker works directly for his own mother. This man is a top-tier specialist she has not unleashed in 12 years, and the last time she did, a body was buried. This signifies the family matriarch is officially done playing legal chess. That scarred phantom is not an investigator. He is the grim reaper called in when negotiations end. The elevator chimes at the penthouse, opening to a scene of quiet horror. Their fortified safe house, swept just 5 hours ago, has been completely compromised. Resting perfectly dead center on the kitchen island is a crisp white envelope. This leaves us with a chilling life lesson. The absolute deepest, most lethal cuts will always be delivered by the hands of your own blood. Let us look at the architecture of a perfect trap. Era sees her name on an envelope, written in the unmistakable hand of her own sister. Before she can even reach for it, Lucian blocks her, his arm snapping out like a steel barrier. He warns her not to touch a single thing. Notice how he avoids calling the police or his security detail. Instead, he dials one number, waits half a ring, and delivers 4 chilling words. She is inside the walls. He hangs up. Era stands completely frozen, her lungs forgetting how to work, surrounded by her husband's sprawling penthouse, staring at a ghost from her past. A cold dread climbs her spine. It is a harsh truth we all eventually learn. The people we hold most dear are often the exact weapons our enemies choose to destroy us. Lucian drops his voice to a grave whisper, ordering Era to step back and remain silent. Moving with terrifying calm, he uses a gloved hand to gently pull the door shut. It makes you wonder how long he has been preparing for this exact moment. He guides her past the elevators, pushing her toward a hidden stairwell she never knew was there. Sometimes in life, the only way to move forward is to step blindly into the dark. They descend 42 agonizing flights of stairs. By the time they reach the concrete floor, Era's legs are shaking so hard she has to grip the metal rail just to stand. Down in the dim service garage, Thomas is already waiting with a swapped getaway car. Lucian pulls the heavy door open, and Era scrambles into the pitch-black safety of the back seat. Let us examine the true nature of panic. It completely strips away your voice, proving just how rarely we actually control our own fate. Era is so paralyzed, she cannot even ask where they are fleeing. Lucian warns Thomas his sister was in the apartment, but Thomas is already steps ahead. A system override was logged at 2:17, triggered by a biometric scan from his mother's chief of security. A man walked in, left the envelope, and vanished in 41 seconds. When Lucian demands to know how they bypassed building access, the revelation is staggering. Thomas calmly reveals that 9 weeks ago, Lucian's mother quietly bought the entire property. The matriarch literally owned the walls surrounding them while they slept. Timing is a cruel architect, and the past often catches up the second you feel safe. The timeline here is the most disturbing puzzle piece. 9 weeks ago, Lucian repeats it out loud, his mind racing. Back then, he and Era were not even speaking. There was no logical reason for Mother's to buy that building, unless she was laying the foundation for a trap. From the shadows of the back seat, Era finally finds her voice, asking what happened 9 weeks ago. Lucian turns to face her with a grim expression and reveals the crushing truth. That was the exact day his mother approved Era's doomed engagement to Adrian. The realization hits Era like a physical blow. The matriarch knew the relationship was a scam from the start. She had built the cage long before Era ever stepped inside. Today, you and I are going to unpack the brutal nature of power. A painful truth of life is that some people will burn your entire world down just to keep their own hands warm. Lucian explains that his mother never prepares for accidents. She only prepares for outcomes she personally designs. She never intended for Adrian to marry Era. The grand strategy was to shatter Era publicly, using that engineered trauma as a weapon against her father. The matriarch wanted to trigger a humiliating scandal that would destroy his credibility, crash his company's stock, and force a massive sell-off. Then, the Beaumont syndicate would sweep in and buy the empire for pennies, all while Adrian played the weeping ex-fiancé for the cameras. It is a masterpiece of absolute, calculated cruelty. As for Era, she was nothing more than collateral damage in a corporate war. It teaches us a grim lesson. Trust is a fragile thing, easily shattered by the exact hands meant to protect it. Lucian spells out her intended fate. She was supposed to be pushed into a psychiatric ward, heavily medicated, and locked away for years. As the deep horror sinks in, Era realizes her own parents would have signed the papers just to face her. She remembers her mother's freezing cold phone call from that morning. At first, Era feels a burning heat behind her eyes, assuming it is grief for the fake life she lost. But that sadness instantly hardens into pure, absolute rage. When she finally speaks, her voice is unrecognizable. Stripped of all warmth, she looks dead at Lucian and swears she is going to destroy his mother. Era is not simply venting, she is forging a solemn vow. There is a defining moment in life where deep sorrow hardens into absolute resolve, and there is zero going back. She looks at Lucian and lays out her terms. No probation, no plea deals, no quiet payouts. She wants that wicked woman to rot in a federal prison cell. Without missing a beat, Lucian agrees. The car slips quietly into a hidden garage. Tomas passes a secure card to Lucian, who presses it into Era's hand. He lays down the absolute rules. Third floor, apartment 3C. She is to open that door for no one except him or Tomas. Use the burner phone and do not even think about opening a window. When she panics and asks where he is going, his answer carries a dark weight. He has to go back to the penthouse and open that envelope. Era tries to reason with him, insisting the envelope clearly has her name on it. But here is a profound lesson about toxic manipulators. Their gifts are never given freely. They are always a psychological test. Lucian understands his mother's twisted mind better than anyone. That letter was never actually meant for Era. It was a calculated trap to see exactly how he would react under pressure. Panic bleeds into Era's voice as she asks what happens if it is an explosive. Lucian remains terrifyingly calm. He tells her that if it were a bomb, they would already be dead. It is a message, and he must read it before his mother makes her next move. Era begs him not to leave her alone. He stares at her in the heavy silence. Then the ruthless Lucian Beaumont softens, gently resting his hand against her cheek. He looks deep into her eyes and makes a quiet promise. Real loyalty is never proven in moments of peace, but in the chaotic spaces where everything is on the line. He is coming back. A man does not wait 9 grueling years to dismantle his mother's empire only to surrender to a piece of paper. He orders her to wait, eat, and remain hidden. Soon, they will finish this cycle of vengeance together. Era is left entirely stripped of words. He presses a firm kiss to her forehead and vanishes into the shadows. Tomas drives her to the safe house, leaving Era alone with nothing but the deafening sound of her own heartbeat. She spends the next 2 hours and 40 minutes sitting on the edge of an unfamiliar couch, gripping the burner phone, refusing to look away from the front door. At the 2-hour and 41-minute mark, the silence shatters. You and I know that the hardest lessons drop the exact second we let our guard down. The burner phone rings, and Era snatches it up instantly. It is Lucian. His voice is steady, confirming he is safe. But when she asks what was inside that envelope, a suffocating pause stretches across the line. Finally, he reveals the truth. It was a photograph, not a written threat, but a snapshot of Era at 14 years old, standing at a summer camp in a yellow shirt. Beside her, with Era's arm draped over her shoulders, is Lucian's sister, Ivy. Era's breath catches in her chest. She stumbles over her words, swearing she never knew anyone from his dangerous family. Lucian softly replies that yes, she absolutely did. Human memory is a deeply fragile thing. We forget the tiny stones we toss into the water, blind to the massive ripples they create years later. Lucian guides her back to the truth. She had only known the girl for 8 days. Era knew her simply as IVM, totally unaware of the dark syndicate she belonged to. They traded just 2 letters before fading out of touch. Letters Lucian discovered in his sister's room last year. The realization hits Era with paralyzing force. Lucian's mother had been watching her since she was 14. That matriarch does not believe in random chance. When Era walked into their world 2 years ago, the trap was already set. She kept a meticulous file on Era for 12 long years, all because a young girl showed genuine kindness to the half-sister the matriarch deeply despised. The weight of that revelation forces the air out of Era's lungs. We all learn eventually that true safety is not found behind locked doors, but with someone who stands beside you when your world burns. Every moment with Adrian was a cage, built by a ruthless woman nurturing a decade-old grudge. Desperation claws at Era's throat as she begs Lucian to come back. 22 agonizing minutes pass before the heavy door finally swings inward. Before it even clicks shut, Era is on her feet, walking straight into the solid wall of his chest. She does not shed a tear, but anchors herself to him with a fierce grip. And Lucian, this ruthless man carved from ice, who claims he has no capacity for tenderness, wraps his arms around her and holds on just as tightly. They stand perfectly still, weathering the massive storm together. Let's take a closer look at this together, because the quiet moments in a crime syndicate always hide the sharpest blades. Era sits there, completely hollowed out, wiping away a tear and asking what could possibly come next. The answer arrives at 6 in the morning. Agent Vega is moving in to spring the trap on Lucian's ruthless mother, his own brother, and even Era's sister. But the cycle of violence always throws a wild card. Ivy, Lucian's estranged sister, sees the news and boards a flight. He begged her to stay far away from this toxic family war, but she runs straight into the flames anyway. It shows us something profound about human nature. The people we try hardest to shield are often the first ones to risk everything to save us. Era lets out a broken, exhausted laugh. It is the first time in 3 brutal days of psychological warfare that she sounds remotely human. She remarks that his sister sounds like a force of nature. Hearing this, Lucian, a man who survived the freezing emotional wasteland of the mob his entire life, simply drops his armor. He admits Ivy is the only relative who loved him without a motive. By 9:47 in the evening, Ivy stands in the doorway. She carries their mother's sharp features, but their father's tragic eyes. She drops a casual greeting before wrapping Era in a deep, silent embrace. It is a quiet reminder for all of us. True family is never just about blood. It is about the people who hold your pieces together when the world tries to break you. Era leans into the embrace, whispering that she remembers her. The grim irony is that Ivy already knows their mother kept a twisted stalker file on Era for years. Lucian lays out the endgame. They will put their mother in a cell, pour a strong drink, and watch the toxic empire burn to ashes. But Ivy did not arrive empty-handed. She drops a thin folder on the desk, 23 pages. That is all it takes to dismantle a dynasty built on blood. On page 4 sits a bank transfer from Margot's private vault to an offshore account, dated exactly 3 days before the crime boss died. The amount is $1.4 million. We learn a hard truth here. No matter how deep you bury your sins, the sheer weight of dirty money will always carve a trail right back to your door. Era voices the heavy question hanging over them. What was the exact price of a human life? Ivy cannot prove it, but the dark arithmetic is undeniable. Exactly 2 days after those funds vanished, their father collapsed from a supposed heart attack, and the doctor who signed the death certificate, he retired 6 months later, buying a beachfront house for exactly $1.4 million. The sheer weight of this betrayal causes Lucian to lose his footing, sinking into his chair. Ivy carried this radioactive truth for 6 agonizing years, knowing nobody would believe a civilian over the untouchable Margot Beaumont. It teaches us a brutal but necessary lesson. When you are fighting a monster, supreme patience is the absolute sharpest weapon you can wield. You and I have to appreciate the psychological gears shifting behind Lucian's eyes right now. He stares at his sister, finally grasping that she was the quiet guardian he never knew he had. He mentions the anonymous email from Sunday, the massive document leak that decimated their syndicate. But Ivy simply shakes her head. She was in an operating room when that bomb went off. The silence that follows is suffocating. Then, Lucian's phone lights up on the desk. The initial shock on his face melts into a dark, understanding smile. It is the chilling expression of a man realizing his enemy just stepped onto their own landmine. In the end, absolute arrogance is usually what forces the most powerful players to dig their own graves. Error is practically vibrating with anxiety, demanding to know what the message says. Agent Vega finally cracked the digital footprint of the massive leak. Error braces for a fatal blow, but she is completely unprepared for the reality Lucian reveals. It was Margot Beaumont. His own mother orchestrated the destruction of her own empire. Lucian slowly unpacks the toxic machinery of her mind. She forged his father's signature on old documents, planting them like a poisoned seed. If her children ever tried to claim power, she could trigger the trap and let them take the fall for her crimes. It is a deeply unsettling reality to accept, but, well, it is true. Very often, the hands we trust the most are the exact ones quietly sharpening the knife to press against our backs. Let's pause and examine the absolute depravity of a parent building a prison for their own child. Margot designed this mechanism so Lucian would rot in a federal cell while she walked free. But when Lucian walked out on her last Saturday, she realized he was completely beyond her control. So she pivots without a second thought. She paints the target directly onto Adrian, her other son, offering him up as a sacrificial lamb to ensure her own survival. Tomorrow, she fully intends to stand before the flashing cameras, weeping artificial tears as the tragic, betrayed widow. It is a terrifying display of pure sociopathy. Deception might be a heavy mask to wear, but some people are so empty inside that the mask simply becomes their actual face. We already know Margot is preparing a theatrical performance for the ages. The tension breaks when Error asks the inevitable question of what they do now. Lucian meets the gaze of both women, and his tone shifts into a state of chilling, absolute calm. He says they will simply let her play her hand, and then they will offer the authorities the one fatal flaw in Margot's design. A living witness who was standing in the shadows the night the boss was murdered. Ivy stares at him, her voice trembling as she insists no such person exists. The room goes entirely still. Lucian absorbs a decade of buried trauma and quietly replies that he was there. You can never truly move forward in life until you turn around and stare your darkest, most painful truths directly in the eye. Try to imagine the sheer psychological torment of carrying a ghost like that. Lucian explains how his father called him, sounding completely broken. Despite 2 years of bitter silence, Lucian drove 3 hours into the dark. He stood paralyzed outside the office door. He heard his mother's voice. He heard the distinct, sickening rattle of those fatal pills. He heard his father choke out a final plea, met only by his mother's absolute ice. For 9 agonizing years, Lucian swallowed that poison. He knew that without concrete evidence, accusing a Mafia matriarch of murder would just sound like the ravings of a broken son. It is a harsh reality of the world. Sometimes, surviving means swallowing your rage until the exact moment you finally hold the hammer. But the long game is finally over. The forged documents gave investigators their paper trail. The $1.4 million payout cemented the motive, and Lucian taking the stand is the final nail in the coffin. Error looks at him, the heartbreak evident in her eyes. She reminds him of his promise to stop lying, noting he's always claimed his father died naturally. Lucian confesses that he had to isolate himself with this nightmare. His sister was safely away, and his brother was a brainwashed pawn. If he had shown even a fraction of his hand, anyone close to him would have been eliminated. It brings us to a painful understanding of sacrifice. You cannot truly protect the people you love if you recklessly pick a fight you are not fully equipped to win. The entire paradigm shifted last Saturday. Lucian turns to Era and delivers a line of profound vulnerability, telling her he finally found someone worth tearing down his silence for. Refusing to let the tears fall, Era simply reaches across the table, no hesitation at all, and grips his hand like an anchor. And then the dawn breaks. At 6 in the morning, federal agents flood 6 separate locations. Margot is dragged from her pristine kitchen, screaming demands for her lawyers. Adrian is arrested in a cheap hotel, and Cleo is handcuffed in silk pajamas meant for a honeymoon she will never take. The whole rotten structure folds at once. We often complain that justice takes its sweet time, but when the hammer finally drops, it shatters the foundation of everything in its path. The syndicate collapses with poetic symmetry. Executives are marched out in steel cuffs, and the chief of securities is tackled on an airport tarmac before his flight to Dubai. By sunrise, the public is captivated by a single striking image: Margot Beaumont, the untouchable architect of misery, doing a perp walk in her robe. She offers no tears, only a venomous glare, declaring her absolute innocence. But the smoke and mirrors are gone. The trial grinds on for 11 grueling months. Lucian sits on the stand for 4 horrific days, bleeding out his deepest traumas for a jury to evaluate. It takes them only 3 hours to return a verdict of first-degree murder. It leaves us with one enduring thought: the truth will always outlast the loudest, most powerful lies. The gavel falls and a fractured dynasty shatters. Margot is handed a life sentence with zero hope of parole. Adrian, the golden boy, is buried under a brutal 22-year reality. Even Cleo is locked away for 9 long years. From her cell, she begs for a single visit. Era responds with total silence, sending only a lawyer to deliver a cold rejection. Her father steps down in disgrace, while her mother flees south, becoming a ghost. Era watches them vanish and does not take a single step in pursuit. You and I must recognize this truth. Sometimes survival requires cutting the cord on those who bleed you dry. Walking away from the architects of your pain without looking back is never surrender. It is the absolute, ultimate reclamation of your personal power. The silence after a war is where the true narrative takes root. Lucian ascends the blood-stained throne of his family syndicate, but instead of ruling with fear, he works relentlessly to wash the empire clean. It takes years to drag a criminal organization into the light. Ivy relocates from Boston to open a children's clinic nearby. 3 years later, the scene shifts to a quiet hospital room. Lucian cradles his newborn daughter, Magnolia. She shares Era's bright smile and her father's quiet resilience. Looking at this fragile new life, completely unburdened by the dark sins of his Mafia past, Lucian finally smiles. The meaning here is profound. Breaking a cycle of inherited trauma is the most powerful legacy a person can leave behind. Consider the sheer madness of this moment. When Lucian quietly thanked her for the proposal, Era let out a hollow, bone-tired laugh. Stripped of all pretense, she confessed the bitter truth. She only proposed because she was consumed by a need for revenge. She was hunting for a weapon, and Lucian was the sharpest blade in the room. His response was devastatingly calm. He already knew. She admitted she felt no love for him back then. He knew. Then she confessed that she truly loved him now. He knew that too. That single honest exchange dissolved a 9-year Mafia war over a hidden file. There is a profound lesson buried in this scene. When two flawed people finally drop their armor, even the most toxic beginnings can forge a beautiful and unbreakable bond. We must examine the profound transformation of Era Beaumont. She first walked through those heavy ballroom doors as someone who apologized simply for existing. But the formidable figure who stepped back out into the freezing night air was entirely reborn. She would never bend her knee again. Through every bitter Mafia storm and quiet victory that followed, she refused to express a single regret. She embraced every chaotic choice that tethered her to Lucian. You and I have probably made the mistake of shrinking ourselves to keep the peace, apologizing while we are the ones bleeding out, bleeding. But the moment you claim your own scars and stop asking the world for permission to survive, you become totally untouchable. Era finally grabbed her true power and never looked back.